Hey, it's Katie Moran. Welcome to Artistic Spirit. Today I'm here with Golden, who is a keynote speaker, healer, and dancer. She holds a degree in child psychology and a degree in dance studies with an emphasis on somatic therapy. She helps audiences reach for their full potential by speaking about mental perspective. Thank you so much for coming on today, Golden.
Thanks for having me.
I'd love to just start off with this idea of how do we stop caring about other people's opinions of us?
This is a challenge for all of us because our biology is set to make us care. If our not so distant ancestors lived in tribes, right? So if you didn't fit in with the tribe and you were booted from the tribe, you died.
Hmm.
And so you have to go against your human nature. And so don't beat yourself up if you find yourself really caring about the likes and not taking action on your biggest dreams because you're afraid of the naysayers, because it takes a lot of courage to truly be yourself and not to care what anyone's going to say about it. And I believe that we're all very unique and weird in our own way. And it's just the normal people have learned how to edit themselves. And there's this concept in psychology about how damaging that is and also how exhausting it is. So if you're one of those people who wake up in the morning and you're just like, enough coffee is not enough, you just like are always tired, a good place to look is, where are you editing yourself? Because it takes a lot of neural capacity and emotional strength to keep pretending to be something that you're not. I like to think about, remember when ankles were considered too sexual to be seen in public, right? We've come a long way with like human freedom and our ability to just like throw it all off, and
Hmm.
be who we are. And what really helps in order to cultivate this ability to just be yourself and ignore the naysayers is a concept that I learned that well, it's actually created for people who have like fear of spiders or
Hmm.
some other like fear of going in public or some of that kind of trauma.
Hmm.
And basically you do controlled exposure. And I apply this to learning how to not care what people think of you. So you want to be at a 7. So if 1 is you feel totally fine and 10 is you are going to have a stroke from the anxiety that is causing you, you want to be at a 7. So taking steps every day to push yourself to that place where you're uncomfortable enough to be growing, but not so uncomfortable that your nervous system is completely dysregulated and you're re-traumatized, right?
Hmm.
So a simple way to do this is something in your closet that you bought that you really like and it just is weird in some way, or not the current style, but your genuine soul loves it. wear the dress, wear the thing, go out um and then you'll realize like, oh, that wasn't that bad. And so the more that you practice this, the more you'll realize, oh, I didn't die by doing something that was it outside of the norm or outside of, societal approval, right? And the more you practice it, the stronger you get. And the reason why this is so important is because you need this skill in order to become successful. No one who's ever reached greatness hasn't looked stupid a million times on
Mhm.
their way there. And so if you're really concerned about what other people think and you're really concerned about fitting in, you're always going to live a mediocre life. And and that's why this is so important.
Mhm. How does the resilience mindset fit into this?
Well, resilience is the ability to weather the storm, to be able to move forward in the face of sudden change or something that you weren't expecting, some challenge in your life. And the way that it relates to this is because when you develop a resilient mindset, you're able to move forward, right?
Mhm. I love this idea of moving forward and this idea in that of movement and because trauma is stored in the body, like this idea of somatic healing is so powerful. And in what ways can we rethink about kind of like our mindset as movement, and also like how does our actual like body movements and dancing and somatic therapy, how does that play into this idea of mindset?
I love this topic. I'm going to start by talking about the nervous system. I'm going to start there because that's the foundation of this, right? So, when you go through a stressful situation, you often become dysregulated. So, if you're not familiar with that concept of becoming emotionally dysregulated, it's when you're like frantic and you can't think straight and you just overwhelmed. And a regulated nervous system is when you're calm, you can think straight, your logical mind is on board,
Hmm.
you have the ability to reach out to other people, ask them for their opinion and help, and like logically move in the right direction and to get out of this situation. So, what happens a lot is people who have gone through intense trauma, their trauma is stored in the body. And if you're interested in reading more about this, The Body Keeps the Score is such a great book, explains more about this. But the body stores what's happened to us. And if you're able to let it move through you, then and fully feel what's happening, then you're fine. But if you don't allow yourself to feel in the moment how painful or scary or shocking this experience was, then the body is going to store that. And recently, psychologists have done brain scans on people with PTSD, and they found that the part of the brain that's affected by PTSD is the exact same part of the brain that is in control of communication and speech. So here people have intense PTSD, they've gone through these intense traumatic experiences, and now we're asking them to talk about it. They don't have the words for it, but the body does. The body has the like body language, right? We speak with our body. Our body has a way of resolving and processing what has happened. So if you've been through a traumatic experience and you find that talk therapy isn't working, you can do these forms of dance therapy that may be more helpful. And another branch of that is just get a massage. How many times have you had a massage and you just like start bawling,
Mm.
because they hit a point that is connected to something? When I was studying dance therapy, I really loved the research done by Gabrielle Roth and the five rhythms. I like some of the different modalities in dance therapy, it's just quiet and they just ask you to move through your feelings and you're just like,
Mhm.
and that's a little more advanced, you could just close your eyes and be like, okay, body, what is it that I'm feeling? And then just intuitively let yourself move. And it doesn't matter what you look like. It's not about putting on a performance. It's about releasing what's held in your body.
Mhm.
And being able to do that will help you become more resilient, will help you be able to get through challenging situations because when you're in challenging situations, often, you know, if you're stressed out, your limbic system just shuts down. The logical part of your brain is just like, I'm out. And then this back part of your brain, the animal part of your brain, takes over and you are just operating from pure instinct, like a cat or a wolf or you know? And so these, a lot of these different modalities like breath work, meditation, any kind of movement, just go outside and put your feet on the ground will help you get to a place where you can solve the problem.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's so powerful, this idea that kind of like taking you out of problem mode, but into like solving mode. And in what ways can we reframe problems that sometimes we are like self-inflicted? So this idea that it's like our own like pessimism, our own like self-sabotage, like how can we how can we be a better friend to ourselves?
How can we be a better friend to ourselves? Most importantly is taking care of yourself.
Mm,
Just the basic, if you're going through a hard time, like the times that I've gone through a hard time,
mhm,
I just go back to create a routine so that I feel safe, do the things that I need to do to take care of myself, and just the basic things that are so hard for us all to do,
mhm,
like get enough sleep, get some time outside, outdoors, breathe, meditate, eat healthy foods. I've been researching a lot about our food and how it impacts our brain chemistry, how it impacts our emotions and our mental health. And it's astounding how the gut is related to mood swings and to your cognitive function. So that would be the best way to be a friend to yourself is to let go of the food addictions. It's easier said than done because they've been manufactured to be very addictive. And to go back to, I don't care what my body looks like. I only care that I am doing the right thing for it.
Mm-hmm.
And to keep coming back to that, like if you were your child, if you were your best friend, what would you do for them? And then do that for yourself.
That's really interesting. So I have definitely struggled with like my relationship with food and having eating disorders, and also this idea of like just feeling like I see my body through the eyes of other people, and kind of like feeling like either I have to be this way or I have to look this way or I have to wear this. And how can things like somatic therapy help us heal from seeing our body from the eyes of other people and what it means to other people, and having that define our worth, rather than kind of like an alternative of being our own partner with our body, and like seeing ourselves as like whether it's like a spiritual being or like just like a functional idea of like my body can move and I can move with it, and like when I do this, like it makes me feel this way. Like how can we heal that relationship, and like what is the role of somatic therapy in that?
I love this question. And I too have struggled with my relationship with food. I was in a like food addiction recovery program and like an eating disorder program for a while, like outpatient.
Mhm.
Um, and this might be a little bit of a sidetrack, but I found I I found that what they were teaching me was not very helpful.
Mhm.
And um, what is helpful is coming back to self-worth
Mhm.
and coming back to doing what's best for yourself. Um, can you tell me the question again? Because my
Yeah.
ADD brain went on a whole.
Yeah, so also it was like kind of like a bigger question, so it wasn't really like boiled down, but how, so coming off of this idea of like being a better friend to ourselves, like how can we have that relationship, like kind of like our food is our best friend, and not in a way that we're addicted to it, but in a way that it's like we can choose what we eat, and we can spend time cooking something that is nutritious, and like we also don't judge ourselves, and kind of like this idea that food is a relationship, and that we don't look at it as something that is shameful or something that we define by like other people saying like how our body looks.
Yeah. Well, this brings it back to how to not care what other people think. And a big part of that is being very picky about the media that you take in
Mm.
because our brains are so impressionable. Like there's just some really cool studies on how like subliminal messages that we didn't even realize we took in affect us. And there is still this culture of women not taking up space, of like, the whole it's just calories in, calories out, which is totally not true.
Mm-hmm.
And that perpetuates eating disorders because they're like, okay, well, I just need to eat less. And it's like, instead of trying to eat less, eat whenever you're hungry, but eat things that truly nourish you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And um, I don't watch the news at all. I don't take in the news. I don't watch TV. I consciously choose podcasts and books that inspire me and that um, that help cultivate an open mindset, that help cultivate um, thinking outside the box and not
Mm-hmm.
being fed the general message that pop culture puts out there, because you can't you can't take good care of yourself if you're trying to starve yourself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's like, the thing is like I think a lot of the problems our society has about food is that we like won't have an honest conversation. Like I think I know I've been friends with people who personally like were like moderately had like an eating disorder. Like they would
Hmm.
starve themselves, they would shame themselves. And like when people would ask them what they ate, like how are they so thin? Like they'd be like, "Oh, I eat everything all the time." And it's like I think a lot of times like people aren't honest about this. And I read recently in a book about like how I forget which book it was, but this idea that like people aren't really honest about like what they're eating or like what they're putting in their bodies, and that creates this culture of like just like everything's awry. Like no one really knows what other people are eating. No one like knows how to like even this idea of like food literacy, like that like children aren't taught like kind of like to read the back of a label of like what's in like food. And that's something that is just so interesting. Like it's like I think a lot of society and like the way they talk about food is that it's like too hard to understand and it's too hard to conceptualize. And you see with like all these like fad diets, like people will be like, oh, actually it's really simple, it's just one, two, three. And like how I think that's so interesting because people are so kind of like desperate for an answer to a question that they don't know how to ask.
Hmm. Mic drop.
Yeah, and I think it goes deeper into this. So I'd love to like transition into this idea of how we can do things to help ourselves. And it could be on so many different things. Whatever resonates with you, take it. Whatever doesn't, just leave it. And I think it's so important for us to recognize that when we take actions to heal and to be resilient, like it's us choosing for ourselves, and that we can have coping mechanisms, we can have things that we do that enable us to heal. Like specifically, I love this idea that healing isn't this abstract thing. It's making decisions that are good for you and consistently doing that. And that healing comes from the actions we take and that we are in control of it. And that it's not something that like comes from like a spiritual awakening, although like not to like discredit spiritual awakenings, but this idea that it's like in our control and that we can do things to move toward healing and to heal ourselves by taking actions that are good for us. And I'd love for you to talk about this one coping mechanism, and that's asking for help. And I love this so much because so much of the time, especially I do a lot of suicide prevention advocacy, and in that, it's a lot of people who are suicidal think they're a burden and they don't want to ask for help because they think they'd be more of a burden. And I think like reframing this and kind of like having having asking for help be in your toolbox for healing and self-care, and having it be a step on your journey and not the whole journey, because I think a lot of the times we tell ourselves like, oh yeah, it's like shameful to ask for help, but also at the same time we tell ourselves like, if I ask for help, I'm a victim. And I'd love for you to talk about how to get out of this idea that asking for help makes us a victim, in like a victim mindset, and how we can really like become that empowered person who chooses what's right for us and takes those healing actions.
I want to start by sharing the story of how I learned to ask for help. Okay, imagine 3-year-old me. I am hippie child, so I have these cute little ringlets in the front and then this massive dreadlock at the back of my head. I have this beautiful lace dress covered in sap. And I have my dirty bare feet and hands on a rock, and I am attempting to push the rock up the hill. And my mom comes along and she's like, "So, Golden, maybe you should push the rock down the hill." And I'm like, "No, I want to push the rock up the hill." She's like, "Okay." And she comes back an hour or so later and she's like watching me in my futile attempt with this rock. And she goes, "Do you want some help pushing the rock up the hill?" And I'm like, "No, I'm going to push the rock up the hill and I'm going to do it all by myself." And needless to say, the rock never met its destination.
Mm-hmm.
And then later, when we were digging the septic and these, backhoe guys came and I saw the perfect rock. They like pulled it out of the ground and I was like, oh. The top was all flat, and they put it at the top of the meadow for me. I asked them to please put this rock there with their big machines. And that became my stage. And being a child who grew up in the middle of nowhere with no media, hardly seeing any people, my mom was just so amazed. How did like she's never seen anyone perform. Why is she talking into a stick on a stone? And I believe it's because it was my purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I I am neurodivergent. I have pretty severe ADD, and um, sometimes I think I'm not the smartest person, but I wouldn't have been able to make it through college and get good grades. I wouldn't have been able to move to a different place if I hadn't learned to just ask for help. And I think this is most important if you're attempting to start your own business. So many people try to do it all, and in our culture, it's very almost celebrated. Oh, she did that all by herself. And then, she develops cancer or some kind of um, other disease because she's overworked, and or she never makes it because she's trying to do it all on her own. Does that answer the question, or is there another aspect of it that you were
No,
hoping to?
I think you bring up so many important points here, and that it is a reframe to see asking for help as a way a way that's almost necessary to, whether it's like to like achieve a dream. And I think it's really important that you bring up this connection between dreams and like utilizing everything you have in your toolbox to get there. Because it's like you're building your dream. And obviously when you build your dream, you need tools. So I
Hmm.
think that's like really, really powerful that you bring all of these ideas together. Um, and also, I personally have heard your backstory and hearing about how you were told that you wouldn't walk again and that you decided for yourself that you would. I think it also like epitomizes this idea that we aren't defined by other people's opinions of us. And I'd love to hear more about your mindset and what you learned from that and how that is something that guides you to help other people.
Yeah, that story was a turning point in my life
Hmm.
for sure. It's so many people have a dream. So many people are like, what is my purpose? This is a human
Hmm.
need. We have the human
Hmm.
for community. Asking for help goes into that, right? We aren't meant to be on our own. We need community and we need a sense of purpose. Like, why am I here? What am I doing? How am I contributing to this community? And when you ask people, what's your dream or what's your purpose? Most people are stumped. And it's not that they don't have one, it's that they're too afraid to admit it to themselves.
Hmm.
And that's the message that I want to share with people by sharing my story, by sharing other people's stories of overcoming adversity, is that you know what your purpose is. You've completely hidden it from yourself. Like it's deep in your subconscious because one, the opinions of society are probably affecting it. And two, your own limiting beliefs around what you are capable of. And three, wanting to do it all on your own if you do know what you're
Hmm.
wanting to do. So just know that whatever it is you desire, it is possible. And if you don't know what it is that you're meant to do here, take a moment and journal about it. Like get deep into what it is that you're here to do. And having that as your lighthouse, as your source of motivation to keep going. You mentioned, suicide prevention and those things. And I have been through moments in my life where I considered taking my life. And I think this is more common than a lot of people are willing to admit. And what helped me get through that is finding my purpose, is turning it around to how can I use this to help other people? When I was working through my food addiction, I turned it into a coaching business after I'd finally found my recovery. Well, kind of failed at that business, wasn't didn't make any money, but failure is a part of it all, right?
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
but having a purpose, a North Star is the best way.
Hmm. How can someone and there's two levels to this. How can someone find their North Star? You mentioned journaling for themselves. And then also, how can they pursue it and like not care, like going back to this theme of not caring what other people think, like how can you pursue it passionately without being stopped by this person might think this or that person might think that?
I'm going to bring it back to, um, well, I was going to start with the first part of the question, which is how do you find your North Star?
Mm-hmm.
And I like to get in a meditative state so that your conscious mind is kind of on the background and you're like super relaxed. And from that state, you can access a deeper part of yourself. So, whatever you need to do to get there, do maybe like a hypnosis or deep breathing, find yourself in that kind of drifty place
Mm-hmm.
and ask yourself, what is my purpose? And then just listen. The other thing, if you want to do it from a conscious place, is to ask yourself, what do I like to talk about? And I could talk about for hours. That's question number one. The other journal question would be, what did I naturally do as a child that brought me joy? And the third thing is, if money wasn't a factor, if you had all the money in the world, what would you do all day? And finally, how do I want to help humanity? Because, you know, I could have sex all day and eat chocolate all day, but like
Mm-hmm.
I also want to like do a little more than just that, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's how you can find your North Star. It helps to have an accountability buddy, have someone, who knows you well and you can reflect these questions off of. And to think about to not care what people think. Think about, write down the different belief systems that go around pursuing XYZ. So a good example would be, I want to be an artist. I want to be a painter. Okay, so you want to be a painter. What subconscious beliefs do you have around painters? A big one is artists never make any money. Um, Artists are depressed, or whatever has been instilled in you as a child through your parents or society at large. And then pull that apart, write those down, and then go into that hypnotic state and try to reframe those beliefs because they're not true. You think they're true because they were instilled at a very early age, but they're not true. There are plenty of painters who make millions of dollars. So why not you? And I found that when I'm doing something I love, I tend to make a lot more money than when I'm doing something that feels like pulling teeth. And I've seen that in my friends as well. So this idea of, if you go for something that's not, you know, the atypical corporate job, that you're not going to succeed, that's so far from the truth. And to be able to reframe that, not just consciously, but from the deep subconscious place where you're holding that belief, that's the best way to not to not care what other people think. If you know your why and you've practiced making mistakes and looking stupid and realizing that it doesn't really matter and it's not as painful as you think. And the funny thing is, once you get to a point where you truly don't care, where you're like, yep, I have a stain on my pants and I just fell on my face and I just lost a bunch of money because I made a stupid mistake trying to move here or something. And when you get to that place where you can truly feel in your high self-worth when you've done something totally stupid, the haters naturally fall away because haters don't feel good about themselves. And that's why they're trying to bring other people down. And when they can't bring you down, their only option is to learn from you, is to look up to you. Not caring about what other people think makes you a leader.
What does leadership mean to you?
Leadership is the responsibility of
Mm.
living your life in accordance with your values. So getting really clear on what your values are and then living them so that you can be an example for other people.
If you could share one message with the audience today, what would that message be?
You're worth it.
Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. I love talking with you and I hope to do it again.